Hi, this is Brent with BDA Studios, and today I want to talk about how to create laser engraving jigs using a 3D printer as well as some free software to help you design and create those jigs. This will work on pretty much any laser engraving machine, but the one I'm going to demonstrate is for the xTool F1. So let's head over there and take a look at what we're going to build and the tools that we need and go through this process. Alright, so what I want to demonstrate is how to create some jigs like this. This is the modular one that I've shown in previous videos. And here's another example of a jig to hold some pens. So the tools that you'll need, you'll want some digital calipers. Now these happen to be really long. You don't need them that long, probably 6-inch is fine. But basically what we're doing is in the F1 we have this base plate that you can take out and then put in its place a jig, sort of like that. So in order to determine how big this is, you're going to want to measure it. Now the simplest way is to take your digital calipers and take the base plate and go ahead and measure that and see what it looks like. Here we're getting about 109, and it looks like about 109 square, so that's a good number to start with. Now there's a couple of ways to do this. One is you can take the measurements, create the jig, print it out on your 3D printer, and then figure out if it fits. The challenge with that, of course, is that you're spending time, you're creating things, you're printing a lot of material, and if you have the wrong dimensions or something is not quite right, you'll waste a lot of time and filament. So what I would do is I'm going to show you how I use cardboard. So I've cut up some thin packing cardboard that I've got, and I want to show you how we can create a template with cardboard first to make sure that it fits before we go through the 3D printing process. Okay, here I am in XCS and I'm connected to my F1, and what I want to do is go ahead and draw a rectangle, and if I hold down the shift key it's going to draw a square with 1-to-1 dimensions. So now when I go to change this, I want to set this to 109. So now I've got this rectangle, this square that is 109, which is the size that we measured. If I press Control and I use my scroll wheel, I can zoom out. So here we have this rectangle. The material that we're going to use is cardboard, so if you don't see it, you can just type cardboard and then go ahead and click Confirm. And it's going to remind you, hey, it's flammable, be careful. We have some options here. What we want is to cut. And the first thing we need to do is notice when I click away here, notice we have these straight edges. But if you look at the base plate, it's got rounded corners. Now, the reason why I'm using cardboard is so that I can figure out, well, what's the right radius. I'm sure there's tools for that, but for our purposes, we're just going to select this rectangle and change the corner radius. I'm going to start corner radius of 2, and that looks pretty good. Let's just see where that goes. And the other thing we need to do is determine the best way to cut this. Now, your cardboard might be a little thicker than the ones that I have. Mine is fairly light. What I've found is if I went with a power of 50, and then the speed is about there, but if I do 2 passes, then it tends to cut through. So let's go ahead and process, and then we'll go over to the machine. So at the machine, what we want to do is set up the jig so that we can use the cutting tool, and then we take our cardboard that I've already trimmed, and basically what I did is I just measured so that it was a little larger than the opening, but small enough that I could close this. Because we're using the cardboard, I don't want to be dealing with the smoke, so we'll close that. Make sure you focus, and then we'll go ahead and close this and run it. Okay, now that did pretty well. Seemed to cut just fine. Okay, let's take a look at the size and see how well that fits. So it seems to fit pretty good. If you take a look here, we could probably do a little sharper corner radius. Let's go ahead and change that. So let's select this and let's make this a corner radius of 4. And we'll do the same settings. Now let's frame this up, because I realized this we want to get this so that we're not missing any spots. So just going to line that up right there. Okay, we'll go ahead and process. Close lid and start. Okay, let's compare that. And so when we fit it in, yeah, that fits nicer. I like that. Okay, so what we've done is we've created a template so that we know our measurements are good. All right, let's go back to XCS and go to the next step. What I want to do now is export this so that I can import it into the software we're going to use to 3D model the jig. So with this selected, if I right click and say export as SVG, then we want to go ahead and save this where we can find it. And I'm going to call this F1 jig template. We jump over to our browser. We're going to go to Tinkercad.com. Tinkercad is a free software you can use that allows you to create 3D models, and then you can export those to then print on your 3D printer. So it's pretty straightforward. Go ahead and sign up. You can use a personal account, and then go ahead and sign in if you already have an account. Once you're signed in, then you can you'll see designs that you've worked on before, and then we can go ahead and click create and a new 3D design. I'm not going to go through all of the features of Tinkercad. There's a lot of videos out there. I recommend there's 2 or 3 channels that I really like that do a lot with 3D modeling, and I'll list those here. HL Mod Tech is a really good one, Tinkercad World, and Teaching 3D Printing. Those have been ones that I've really enjoyed. So there's a lot of videos out there on how to get started with it. But basically what we're doing at this point, I'm going to rename the project, so I'm going to call this F1 jig template. And now what we want to do is import the SVG file that we exported from XCS. So go ahead and click open and then import. Okay, so here we've imported our SVG, and it's automatically created this 3D object, and it's got the corner radius and everything that we want. It imports it and automatically sets it to a certain height. So right now this is 10 millimeters, and that's pretty thick for what we're doing. So I can go ahead and just change this, and let's set this to 5 millimeters. So for our purposes, we're going to use this base plate. We know that it will fit into the bottom of the F1, but we want to place something on top of it so that we can cut shapes out of it in order to make it as a jig to hold some things. So let's do the one for the pen. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. So I press Control D, and now it's duplicated. And then if I hold the Control and use the up arrow key, it moves it up for me. So now what I want to do is scale this up, and if I press Shift and then click on this corner, I can scale it up. And the dimensions, to keep it inside of the enclosure, you're going to want to keep it about 130 millimeters or less. So if we say 125, then notice that both dimensions are now 125. And at this point, what we want to do is line these up. So if I click and drag away, so what I'm doing is I click away, nothing is selected, and then if I click and drag, I now select everything that I moused over. So at this point, we're going to click the Align tool, and with the Align tool, we're going to align the center here and align the center here. So you can see now that we're lined up, but at this point we want to join them together. So if I click away and then I select the top one, and then I grab this and I bring this down, and if we know that I'm using, by the way, the navigation, you kind of have to get used to this, but on the navigation, if you have a mouse wheel on your mouse, then you can click the mouse wheel and drag, and then you can see a little better. But we know that this bottom one is 5 millimeters tall. So if we move this so that it is then 5 millimeters above the ground, we know that they're now touching. And so at this point, we can take both of these and select them. And notice they're both selected. And then if I press, I can group them. And so there's this group option, or you have the shortcut key. So now I have our template. So we have this base plate, and now it's connected to this top plate. So when I move them around, we have that. So now I want to make a jig for holding some pens, and I have these bamboo pens that are engravable, and what I want is to represent, I want to cut out the shape so that I can lay the pens across and then be able to hold them in place. So what I'll do is I'll grab this cylinder, and notice this cylinder is set up as a hole, and the sides and bevel, we don't need to worry about bevel. Segments just helps with making it a little smoother, so you can set it to 10 for that, and same with the number of sides, and that'll make it so that it'll be a much smoother circle when you go to cut things out of this. So first I need to measure my pen diameter to understand how wide these pens are, and looking at it, I know you can't see it, but they're about 10.9 millimeters. So if I take this cylinder, if I hold the shift key and then I click on the corner here and I kind of wiggle it like this, what it's doing now is when I make a change, it's going to automatically adjust both numbers, all three numbers in the dimensions that we want to change. So again, we're going to say 10.9, and then if I press tab, it will make that change. So now what we want to do is we want to create a cylinder that is longer than our template, because we want to cut out the entire width of this template. So if we select this, and you remember we're 125, so if I kind of zoom in here so we can see this a little better, if I click my top height dimension and I just say like 130, just so that it's easier to see. So now I've got this giant pen cylinder. If I click this little rotate thing and if I move the mouse within, it's going to incrementally adjust it, and that's what we want. We want to set it to 90 degrees. And if I let go and now I want to click, and then at this point I can bring this down to my workspace and you can see where it's going to fit, and I can drag it and line it up. If I want to be precise, let's say I've got it set up over here. If I want to be precise, I can click away and then I'm going to click drag, and I've selected both. Now I'm going to press the align tool, and at this point when you have the align tool, notice how you could align one object to another. And so if I click on this larger object, now when I click align, everything's going to move towards where the large base plate is. So if I click here, I want to center that, and if I wanted I could center it here in the middle. That way I can start this template with something in the middle. Alright, let's adjust the height so that I want to click away, then I select the cylinder, I want to drag this down, and I want to bring it down to where it's about halfway, and at this point you can kind of eyeball it. Okay, now go ahead and while this is still selected, or if it's not selected, go ahead and select the cylinder, press Control D because I want to duplicate, or you can press this button. I want to duplicate. Now I want to hold down the Shift key and then use the arrow keys, and I want to move it down. And what I'm doing is I'm moving it down a few spots. Now if I press Control D again, it's going to duplicate it and then place it the same distance. But in our case, what I want is to take this one that's selected, I'm holding the Shift key using the arrow keys, and I'm moving it up. So now I've got a jig where I've got 3 pens. Now depending on the type of pen, this one has a little clip on it, so you could have more here if you wanted. But for our purposes, I've got these 3 pens, and I want to go ahead and click and drag and select all of them, and then I want to group them together, and so you can press the group button and then it will go ahead and group it. So now I have this template made, and we've got our base plate and we've got slots for holding pens. So at this point we're ready to export. So you can export a couple of ways. If nothing is selected and you click export, it's going to export everything in the design. If I select the object and then I choose export, it's going to just the selected shape. And then what I want is the .stl file. So now it's gone ahead and downloaded it. So from here we can open the STL file, and I happen to be using Bambu Studio because I have a number of Bambu printers. If you have different printers, this will work. You can import the STL file into your software. Alright, let's go ahead and set this up. I want to print this. I have an A1 mini, so I want to select my A1 mini, go back to prepare, change this to the A1 mini, and then synchronize the filament, and then I'm going to change this color to the gray that I have. So with the object selected, I press the number 3, and now the filament color is changed. And here this is all ready to go, and we'll go ahead and slice the plate. And there is some overhangs, so we can go ahead and go back here and enable supports, and then slice it again. So we have supports enabled now, and that should work just fine. Something else we could do when we talk about how fast is this going to print, how long will this take, you could bump this up to a layer height so that it goes a little faster. On the strength, it doesn't, it's not a structural thing, so you could reduce this infill down to maybe like 3%. Let's slice that. Take an hour and 40 minutes. Not too bad. Alright, let's go with that. Alright, so here is our jig that we've made, and it looks pretty good. So let's test it out, see how well it fits. Okay, it's a little snug. Now, let's take a look at why. It's kind of hard to tell, but basically what's happening is we're getting a little, it's flattened out a little on this bottom edge, or they call it elephant footing, where the bottom of it is flattened out, and so it extends larger than the dimensions of what you were printing. So there's a couple of ways to address this. One, I'm just going to use a deburring tool, and we'll just run it along this edge and clean it up as best we can. So we'll strip that edge off a little bit like that. There we go. Alright, let's see how that goes. There it goes. So now it fits nice inside. So that's one way to do it, is you're basically deburring, you're removing this edge so that it's not sticking out as much. But there is a setting. Let's take a look at Bambu Studio. This is a setting that you can change in Bambu Studio, and it's going to be similar in other slicer software. For Bambu Studio, it's under quality, and what we're looking for is this elephant foot compensation. So what you would do is you would indicate a value to where it would shrink that first layer, so that as the heat and everything causes it to flatten out, it will compensate for it. So typically I would say like 0.2 millimeter. You can kind of experiment with that, but basically that's the other way that you can solve to make that work. Well, I hope that was helpful. Again, this is just one of many ways that you can create jigs for your laser engraving. Really all it takes is some way to measure the space that you're trying to fill. Use cardboard to create some templates to figure out the size that you need, and then you can print in 3D and work with your machine to make it easier when you're creating and laser engraving unique objects. Alright, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.